Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted and honored to have with me Ms. Laurence Ion, who is an entrepreneur, investor, vested in accelerating progress in longevity biotech to extend healthy lifespan with a mission to bring aging under medical control. He is the founding steward at VitaDAO, a community-owned collective funding and supporting longevity science. Laurence is propelling research and innovation that has potential to transform the landscape of aging interventions and medical advancements through his ventures such as Jellyfish DAO and Vitalia City. So, Laurence, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Now, you've got like a moonshot of making death optional, and that's like really far out moonshot, but you also have bringing aging under medical control. So these moonshots they are obviously really challenging, and your approach is to gather a community to turn this into a reality. When and how did this belief take over and it became your life mission of making death optional and bringing aging under medical control?
I think about 7 years ago is when I started changing my career towards this. I was aware of this idea of bringing aging under medical control as an approach, different approach to medicine. So instead of keeping people in a poor state of health for longer by managing their symptoms, which is what medicine mostly does when it comes to chronic age-related diseases. People spend 80% of their healthcare spend in the last year of life, mostly in a hospital bed, not very happy, right? I think it makes a lot more sense to target the root cause of all of these diseases like Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancer, and so on. The root cause being, of course, that we get old and degenerate over time, like any other machine or system, basically. So even though I was aware of these efforts, I didn't think it's kind of my place there, or also I was really young. I didn't dream that big. I didn't have the courage to change my career. But at some point, I was quite present to my pains and aches on all my in joints, especially in my ankle back then. I have this genetic disease. I've grown up with a lot of surgeries, spent a lot of time in hospitals growing up. But here I was 23 or something and not having a great outlook. I was thinking, damn, it's getting worse and worse. How am I going to, age when I'm going to be in my 30s or 40s and so on? Never mind 60s, 70s and onwards. I didn't have great models of elderly people around me that were okay. They were in pain, suffering, not really healthy aging. So, I'm glad that I was present to being sure, I don't want this aging thing to happen to me more so than it already has. Now, of course, I have a genetic disease, not just aging, but it is accelerated in some ways, I guess, in my joints, let's say, and all these bone tumors affect my quality, the way my body feels, right? So, at some point, I just decided to change my career, jump head in and think, well, at least if I can help move or accelerate progress by one day, that's 110,000 people that wouldn't die anymore, because that's how many people die every day from aging. And also, it could be that I feel like our generation is so close that we could see the future. We could really have aging solved in our lifetime. But it could be a difference of just one day. At least for some people, it could be even for me, right? And even 1 or 2 years, you can do a lot for your personal health. I was already avoiding sugar and alcohol and all kinds of things like that, trying to be as healthy as possible. But I was like, I don't know how many years I'll get. And maybe I can also advance the field and not just extend my lifespan a bit, but also bring back closer the time when we have some therapies that can actually do something for us. Because right now we have zero interventions that have any that have been proven to extend lifespan in humans. And I noticed that it had passed like more than a decade since I was aware of this industry, and I hadn't seen actual clinical progress. I hadn't seen therapies that make the old young again, right? I do want to see people being rejuvenated and being in an optimal state of health as a choice. So that's where the bring aging under medical control comes, and that's most of the problem of death. Of course, there's accidents and other things, but I think those are also a problem, and suicide, mental health, but that's kind of second priority for me. Priority number one is most of the deaths come from aging. Two-thirds of deaths.
Aging is such a huge problem, it stresses out the entire healthcare ecosystem as well as the economy, and if we are able to solve, like you mentioned, aging in our lifetime, it would be super awesome, but then, there is the general people today, I think, still see aging as something which is natural and as an inevitable process. It's like a linear thing, and aging obviously happens. But now I think that there is a shift. Because there are a lot of these neurosciences who are saying that pausing or even reversing aging is could be possible. Do you see that aging would one day be treated as called as a disease? That's my first question. And you mentioned about the big pharma, the big pharma, because largely, I mean, the way they function is because creating a drug means like pumping in billions of dollars, and then the end goal of that is to make sure that you maximize that, and largely it looks like the big pharma is interested in profitable treatments, and not actually cures, for the illness. What are your view on the pharma industry is my second question. Is it efficient enough? Does it need a change?
So first, I do think aging is a problem, right? Just a medical problem. Some people think we should call it a disease because then you can actually pass drugs through something like the FDA that can target aging as a disease. Some people think it shouldn't because it might insult people. Like, what do you mean? I have a disease. I'm just, I'm okay. I'm just kind of old or something. I'm like, I've been born a long time ago, but I'm not diseased or something. It's just semantics, and I think maybe some countries will call it a disease, some won't, or whatever. That's not really my focus. My focus is at the root cause, not just root cause of disease, which is aging, root cause of what's holding us back. Why are things so slow, and why are things so expensive? So is pharma efficient? No, of course not. It takes billions of dollars to make new drugs. Their R&D efficiency is below the return of cost of capital. They have to buy smaller biotechs for innovation. They're not efficient with their own R&D. But you kind of have to ask, why does it take 10, 15 years for a new drug to come to market? Why does it take billions of dollars? Latest estimate is like 6 billion, could be 1 or 2 or even up to 6 billion. And it didn't used to be like that. We used to get 100 times more drugs per dollar spent. In a few decades ago. Before 1962, the FDA had a deadline of 6 months to approve a new drug, self-imposed, and it only required safety trials before it allowed the drug to be sold. After 1962, there were some disasters with thalidomide, where it was a safety issue. Some babies were born without limbs, and in the US they prevented that, but in most countries they didn't. So like the public was quite horrified, and gave the FDA a lot more power, and somehow also they got power to mandate efficacy trials to prevent snake oil salesmen, but that's a separate matter from safety. And unfortunately, right now, we have this blind spot, invisible graveyard of people dying waiting for medicine, right? There's tens probably tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people suffering right now from aging and in a very poor state of health. And we're thinking, oh, let's be very careful and also make sure that it's efficacious and nobody's sort of over-promising things. But some people are terminal and they have no other choice. And aging is a terminal disease for all of us. So I think it should be an individual choice of how much risk you want to take. This way we could move faster. And so my way to do that is not only bring people in a community online to fund more research, as you mentioned, VitaDAO, but also bring people in person to coordinate in creating a self-governing city where we care about this new approach to medicine, care about our health as number one, and we can create the regulatory framework such that we can move faster. And we're willing to have that regulatory sandbox to see if things will work better, and maybe the world can watch and incorporate what works. We do this with everything else that's successful, like evolution has diversity. With companies, you can start a new company and try a different way. You don't have like the computer company which does computers, and then if you have mainframes, you have to change lobby inside the company to create PCs or something. No, you start a new company, an Apple and a Microsoft, and instead of mainframes and enterprise customers, you say, I'm going to make PCs. And I say, I think that's the future, right? And then everyone else watches and copies you if that works better. And so I think the same way with jurisdictions, we shouldn't try to only reform the system and like 49% arguing with 51%. We should also have the ability to exit, try something new, start something like a new company, a new jurisdiction where some of us are living, and we say, okay, let's try it this different way. The rest of the world doesn't see it. We see it. Most of the time, probably people will be wrong, and then sometimes be right, and then everyone is for the better.
Right. Well, Laurence, yeah, obviously, I think, we need diverse voices, diverse ways of solving a problem. Pharma traditionally has functioned in a centralized, top-down, hierarchical way. Now you are talking about decentralization, and you said, self-governing cities, where you have DAOs, and you're talking about DeSci. It will be great if you can give the audience an understanding of what DAOs are, and what DeSci is, and how is this approach you feel will be able to challenge these multi-billion-dollar pharma industry?
Yeah, companies are a way to coordinate people to a common goal. It's just that there hasn't been that much innovation in how that is structured. There are cooperatives, co-ops, right? There are some different types of organizations, nonprofits with different structures and boards and so on. It's just DAOs are a new iteration on how people organize themselves. It's a lot more loose, a lot more decentralized and democratized. Anyone can buy this token and get a voice in what the organization does. And in longevity, for example, VitaDAO is at least the only significant token I know of. So the only way I know for people to contribute capital into longevity, because usually you have to be an accredited investor if you want to actually put money into startups that target aging as a problem, or VC funds that invest in startups, right? You have to be an accredited investor, which is over $1 million in the US, for example, or over 200K in income for 2 years. It's a very high bar. With something like VitaDAO, not only can people just buy this governance token and have a voice in what kind of research gets funded, what kind of companies get spun out, and so creating a lot more companies, creating a lot more innovation at the earliest stages where it's the most needed, where VCs don't really look. Also, it allows anyone to contribute. So it's more like a community. Like imagine this Reddit. That instead of just kind of voting and chatting, you have a bank account and you have a way to coordinate instead of just like heat, everyone kind of talking and stuff. You have a voting mechanism where you act like a force. You're a community that has a direction, right? So similar to a company that has a vision, a mission, and it executes. Right? But it's also a bit similar to a municipality, a city where we have a lot of people that delegate some kind of power to some people that then choose companies to execute. I do think, a Reddit community can't just build a bridge, right? They would have to argue about each nut and bolt or whatever, right? But they can say, let's delegate to this person or like this company that has built bridges before. We put the money together and we give it to this company and they do that. And so DAOs like VitaDAO function a lot like that. They delegate to squads or pods that do specific things for the community. Ultimately, it's more scalable, more democratic, more sustainable, censorship resistant, and so on. Then regarding DeSci, so we kind of started this whole field with funding real world research, but there's way more to DeSci, decentralized science. It's this idea of communities doing all of science. So you have funding, but you also have publishing of science. Publishing papers right now, it's quite broken in academia. Also execution. There's a lot of gatekeepers. You have to go through this very long training or deprogramming intense period of 20 years, right, to get a PhD, become a professor, right, run your own lab and so on. And by then you're completely devoid of any autonomy or creative independent thinking, I think. So how about any kid in their garage, just like they don't need anymore to buy their own server that's super expensive to run a website. They can just go on AWS or any kind of website builder, click a few buttons. How about in science as well? They can use existing machines at different labs that are super expensive, but most of the time they're not used, right? Use tokens to exchange services between labs and just do science execute it in a more decentralized fashion without needing to be in the lab with physical access and credentials from a university.
During COVID, I think the first time in the world, we got to a vaccine in maybe a couple of months' time. And that was completely unknown to create a vaccine. It's a couple of year process. And the reason I think it happened, because I think the entire world kind of joined hand and came together and said, okay, let's solve this problem. With decentralized autonomous organization, I think it's a great move where you let the investor have a voice and govern, but it also is a little challenging. I feel currently today, because there's so many voices and it can get very chaotic, very very fast. But I'm sure that these challenges will get sorted over the next few years. Now, you mentioned about VitaDAO, and on the website it says, there are 23 research projects, which has been funded. There's been 4.5 million, which has been deployed. Is any of the interventions when it comes to longevity research, are they market ready? Have they been tested? There's some clinical trials. Will be great if
unfortunately it takes decades,
right?
It takes decades to bring drugs to market in the current system, right? Except, as you mentioned, with COVID, it was Operation Warp Speed. When there's a will, there's a way, right? If the society wants something fast, it doesn't take decades anymore. It takes a few months, right? So I was thinking, also we've seen how publishing is a lot different. Like, nobody waited for a long 6 to 9 months peer review. It was all pre-publishing, preprint servers, Twitter, people commenting, scientists from all over the world comment. Like, that's DeSci, right? Now, of course, there's a lot of noise, but it showed that things can be done in another way. And we have a lot of new tools using crypto to coordinate better, so we can act as with a direction, as a force, right? And drown out the noise. So when there's a will, there's a way. We can maybe convince society that we should do Operation Warp Speed for aging. But my thing is, like, what if we can't? And 20 years later, we're still just basically with drugs that we're thinking about today coming out. And, then we need to iterate on those to improve them in another 15, 20 years or whatever. um, we're not going to make it in that way. We need to rethink this. So maybe society won't be convinced that we should do warp speed for aging. So let's have a hedge. Let's come together in person. We came last year as an experiment for 2 months in Montenegro, 200 people. We called it Zuzalu. It was spearheaded by Vitalik Buterin. And a bunch of us from VitaDAO were helping with the longevity side. We were a team of let's say 7 people in total in Zuzalu that put it together very last minute. And we didn't figure out a lot of things. We didn't yet create a city in Montenegro or thing. But we saw that there's something there. It was life-changing for a lot of us. We saw that there's enough density that it feels like San Francisco. It feels like, holy shit, this is a place where I could live. About tens of thousands, and what if it's not 2 months, but 6 months? But what if we actually live there permanently? So we got we learned some things. Then my thing is we should have at least one. So we should have one thing that we align around to have a mission, like a company kind of, but still be a community building a city. So I thought, okay, let's build a longevity city after that. So we went to this special jurisdiction in Roatan to make a pop-up city called Vitalia, January, February this year, with the idea that we will build potentially a biotech district there in this charter city, and also expand all over the world and have at least 2 or 3 special jurisdictions where we can create drugs faster, not just one, but also have members all over the world and so on. Now I'm looking for new locations. I'm not working with that jurisdiction in Honduras anymore, but so that was called Prospera. But I am talking to governments to look for a new special jurisdiction. And meanwhile, we still keep growing this movement of gathering in person, I'm here, I just arrived in Berlin. Zeller City is going to start October 5th until November 17th. That's 6 weeks sort of camp where we live here together. We have event space. We have healthy food available, and exercise together, keep each other accountable to live healthy, but most importantly, co-work to build new biotech companies in longevity, and establish a longevity hub in Berlin. Then we do it in LA, then in San Francisco, and so on. And we do it in many cities. It's going to be at least 12 that I can think of right now. I've talked to people in various cities, and they want to build this in their city, right? So it's just like, okay, building this movement with in-person gatherings in major cities. And when we have a deal from a government to really build a new city where we have our own laws and regulations, then a lot of these people could move there, coordinate to create that special jurisdiction and create that warp speed effort. Hopefully within 9 months, we will have a new location announced.
Lovely. How cool is that? I mean, Laurence, so more power to you and your team. So you said you already have Zuzalu, Vitalia, Prospera, and Zillar right now in Berlin that you're talking about. This intention over here is to create these biotech district where you bring in like-minded people, you bring in zero scientists. Do you create labs? What does one do over there? I mean, because is it just about creating startups, or do you create an ecosystem where these zero scientists can come, talk to each other, collaborate? Because I believe that we still live in a world where we keep on, because it's still $1 billion opportunity, because whoever gets to the intervention for longevity is going to be the next billionaire. So the way I see it is these Altos labs and so many others, which is like hugely funded. Obviously, they're not going to be a part of it, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of zero scientists going to be part of it. But would the top players be part of it? Because everybody wants to patent their approach, because everybody's got an approach to get to solving this problem. So how does this work? I mean, how do you get these people to come together? And if it's a city, how do you expect to accelerate this? When you're talking about, I mean, instead of 10 years, how do you get to creating a drug in 4 months? Would be great if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's a city is for all kinds of people. If you think about something like Los Alamos with the Manhattan Project, yes, they brought in top physicists in that temporary city, and it was run by the military top down with a huge budget and so on. Maybe they didn't need as much auxiliary personnel, but they still had a lot of auxiliary personnel, not just physicists, right? They also had their physicists' families, by the way, and so on. People live there, right? So I think here it's even more so bottom up, decentralized. You need all kinds of people. You need marketers. You need programmers to build platforms for people to collaborate better. You need, lawyers. You need baristas and surfers and yoga teachers and all that, right? Like it's a lot about culture as well. We live together. Of course, we need top scientists, and of course, people from Altos Labs are happy, are welcome to build a. They actually are quite decentralized too. They have labs in various places in the world. So why not have a lab in one of our existing locations in major cities and eventually in the special jurisdiction that we will build when we have an agreement with the government. So yeah, people can, instead of living in their apartment feeling quite isolated in some random place where they're the only one that actually wants to live longer and everyone around them is playing the game where they party late, they drink, they eat fast food or shit, right? And it's hard to have all these healthy habits and make sure that you eat healthy by yourself. It's easy when the only food that's available around you, it's healthy. It's easy when everyone goes to bed consistently and keeps up all the healthy habits, and you see them exercising and you're like, okay, I'm just going to join them. We are social creatures. And I do think, this has been life-changing for me and a lot of us. So I highly recommend anyone can figure out, or even just your presence in such a place is helping the movement, right? There's something that you can add. You can be a listening ear to someone who's struggling with their startup or their science experiment or whatever, right? Like it's just building a new society where we have these values.
Right. So this is more for entrepreneurs, not as much for those zero scientists, because there's no lab as such.
For everyone, no, both, no, everything, everyone. If you're a scientist, yeah, sometimes you need access to labs, but sometimes you can do it from your laptop, work with CROs, you get funding, right? There's a lot of investors, a lot of billionaires usually coming to these and so on in our network that are looking for projects to fund, and people do get funding. There have been millions of dollars deployed, for example, in companies that were part of the Vitalia acceleration program. Now, of course, Vitalia, we're having a separation that is to be announced in more detail at some point. But people can come get funding, even if the lab is not necessarily here. If in some of these locations, by the way, there exist community labs nearby, but most biotechs today are quite virtual, such that you just deploy the money, you run some computational biology, you have some data, you contract the CRO, pay them the money, and they do the experiments. They get you the data back. You have bioinformaticians looking at it and decide what the next experiment is, and so on. But of course, over time, we'll have more and more labs. So that's for scientists, right? And I think scientists should be more entrepreneurial. So scientists, entrepreneurs, to me, they should be sort of at least collaborating. You have entrepreneurs that just come usually from tech. They've had an exit, made their money, quite classic cliche, solve the money problem. Now they're thinking about the death problem, right? And you have scientists that don't know how to sell or raise money. They're spending 80% of their time on writing these boring grants to bureaucrats that are scared if you do anything more than a small iteration. If you take any kind of risk, if you sound in any way revolutionary, right, you have to conform. So yeah, fuck that. Let's try a new system where you can get funding for the ideas that are more radical, that actually can move the needle for aging in our lifetime, and ideally our parents' lifetime. Then also, of course, combine with entrepreneurs that can raise more capital and figure out how to remove bottlenecks, advance what you want to advance.
Yeah, so makes sense. So you've done a couple of these pop-up cities. You mentioned Zuzalu, Vitalia, Prospera, now Zilar. I mean, what's been the most interesting outcome from these cities? And so that's my first question. Second is, I've been invested in metaverse. So we build these virtual worlds. So instead of physical world, have you ever thought about, creating these virtual worlds where you'll be, creating a virtual world, so you'll be giving access to people from around the world? That's my second question. Is something like you looking at metaverse? And my third question is, because you've been vested in this space, for the longest time, supporting through VitaDAO. Is there any promising approach that you see currently in the development of this longevity science you think could get us to the goal of human longevity, age reversal in the next few years or this decade?
When it comes to therapies that might be ready, one of our projects in VitaDAO is ready for clinical trials. It's just that usually you need a lot of money, right, to go, and a lot of time to go through the regulatory hoops. And the nature of this project is such that it's not as attractive to pharma, because if you have to spend billions of dollars, I understand pharma, like, okay, you have to spend billions of dollars and decades to go through this process. At the end, you need to have very good patent protection. If you make a drug for aging, the market is way bigger than anything else, right? Yeah, billions of people that want to be rejuvenated. So what's more important than being healthy again, being young again, right? So, right, the point is, this is a worthwhile effort. It's for, you can also get as rich as you want, honestly.
Yeah, right. Laurence, my last question to you is there a age reversal regimen that you follow? Because there are a lot of repurposed drugs and there's lifestyle. Is there anything that you follow, and what comes next for you?
Just the usual advice of, eat food that's usually grown in the garden. I also eat meat, but that's another whole debate, and people don't drink alcohol. I take care of my sleep, right? I super prioritize it. I'm not yet that great at it, especially since I travel too much. I sacrifice a lot of my personal health and well-being for advancing the mission. But I still, it is a big priority for me. So sleep, that's where it's the hardest. And of course, being active and things like that. Of course, not smoking, and it's just the usual things. Then there's all these supplements and other interventions, like, of course, sauna, infrared, whatever. We don't have much data. I mean, of course, I love a sauna. If I have a deficiency, I take supplements, but we don't know the interactions of all of these. When I hear people taking 120 supplements, I'm like, how do you even know they're not antagonistic? A lot of the studies, if you look into them, you combine things that work and have benefit. And when you combine them, a lot of the time, actually, they're antagonistic and you're worse off. So we just need more science. We need to know what could work. And meanwhile, we can just do our best to follow something that makes us feel relatively healthy. And
Laurence, really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Wish you and the team the very best. Yes, I think it's a huge moonshot and you are going against the tide. But I think, it's worthwhile, to create something unique and charting your own path rather than, walking on, the known path. So, I mean, so more power to you. Yes, I'm sure it's going to be a challenging ride, because you are facing the multi-billion-dollar pharma industry. But yes, I mean, if we get through this longevity mission through decentralized approach, then wow, I mean, what a world that would be. So more power to you, and to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Thank you, Laurence. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.